Today, I'd like to talk about the abuse of the Mega-Diocese. And it goes into this narrative, this question of how could Theodore McCarrick get into a seminary, get ordained a priest, become the Bishop of Metuchen, become the Archbishop of Newark, become the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and a member of the College of Cardinals. How could all of that happen? This is what Catholics all over the world, all over the United States are asking. And there are a number of reasons. The first is that there's a denial of faith amongst some in the clergy. This ranges from atheism, agnosticism, even Satanism. We have clergy who do not believe in Jesus Christ, do not believe in the seven sacraments, do not believe in the Catholic Church. And so they see the church as an international instrument for justice, for political purposes. And so they're in it to get income, insurance, medical care, retirement, and to put forward their social agenda. The second problem is homosexuality. There's been an infiltration since the 30s, the 40s. We see this with the Bella Dodd confessions. Archbishop Fulton Sheen knew about it and spoke about it. We know that outsiders, enemies of the church, Freemasons, communists, infiltrated the Catholic Church through the seminaries and put in men who were sympathetic and advocates of communism, atheism, and who were morally compromised, usually through same-sex attracted vices. And the third problem is the Mega-Diocese. A Mega-Diocese is any diocese that's too big for a bishop to run. We are now, in our time, in the third millennium, seeing dioceses that have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million baptized Catholics under an archbishop. So today we're going to look at the problem of the Mega-Diocese and offer some solutions. But before we look at the problems of the Mega-Diocese, I just want to say this, a disclaimer. I am not saying that all the problems, all the scandals in the church are because of the Mega-Diocese. Obviously, we need reform. We need heroic priests. We need to revisit purity and chastity and speak against pornography, sex before marriage, sex outside of marriage. We need a renewal in Catholic education system, and especially in the seminaries, in Orthodox theology, Thomistic theology, classical moral theology, and with the likes of St. Alphonsus Liguori. So there are literally dozens of things that need to be done for reform. I'm just focusing today on one that most people haven't thought of, and that is this problem of the Mega-Diocese. Now, all of us parents want to find schools where there's a student-teacher ratio that is low. In other words, we want a teacher for like every 10 or 12 students. We know from studies that the less students in the classroom, the higher the students perform because they have more attention from the teachers. They have greater outcomes when it comes to college and income. They also perform better on tests and grades. We all know this. We all desire it. When we find a school system where there's one teacher to 40 students, 50 students in a classroom, we know for a fact that the scores and the outcomes are lower. And yet, when it comes to the Catholic Church, we have a problem that's very much like what we see in public schools. We see a ratio of disciples, baptized people, to the bishop as very, very high. This problem of the Mega-Diocese was created in the 1500s, but it's really come to fruition in the last 150 years or so since the fall of the Papal States. Take a look at some of these numbers. The Archdiocese of Los Angeles has 4,174,000 lay Catholics within it. The Archdiocese of New York has 2.5 million, Chicago 2.4 million, and Boston just over 2 million lay baptized under the oversight of the Cardinal Archbishop. How can a bishop manage all of these people and all of these priests? Well, it hasn't always been this way. If you look into the early church, you look at the medieval era, every single town, city, municipality had its own bishop. There were not any huge regional dioceses. They were political, that is from the Greek polis. They were related to each township. This is why you go to a place like Assisi in Italy, which is a very small town up on a hill. It has its own cathedral. It had its own bishop. You see this everywhere in Italy. I'm going to put up on the screen a map that I created. You can see here that Italy 227 dioceses. Why is this? Well, Italy, all these churches, these cathedrals and these dioceses were erected from the 2nd century all the way up until about, well, before the 1500s, throughout the medieval era. Now, you'll also see the United States. The United States has 167 dioceses, so a lot less than Italy, and yet the United States is so much bigger. Italy is only 116,000 square miles. The population is 60 million. The United States is 3.8 million square miles and has a population of 326 million people. So you can remember the Founding Fathers, no taxation without representation. Here we have a situation where there is not proper representation of our shepherds over the people. Why is this? Well, since the fall of the Papal States in 870, the Catholic Church slowed down its bishop appointments. By this time, all bishops were being appointed directly by the Vatican, by the Pope. And so the church began to settle for mega-dioceses, especially in areas that were growing fast in missionary territory, like America, like South America. And by the 1900s, this problem was everywhere, and it becomes ridiculous by around the year 2000. Just for example, in 1950, the Bishop of Los Angeles served 832,000 lay baptized. That's a lot of people. But in 2016, that number had jumped up to 4.4 million lay Catholics. This is a five-fold increase. Now, the mega-diocese is based on this assumption that one man can shepherd 1 million people and oversee hundreds of priests. For example, LA has 1,117 priests. So how is the bishop, the Archbishop of Los Angeles, supposed to keep his eyes on 1,117 priests along with 4.4 million lay people? It's impossible. No one could do it. And just for reference, medieval England in the year 1086 had 3.6 million people. So the Archdiocese of Los Angeles is bigger than the entire population of in 1086. Just imagine in 1086, if all of England only had one bishop, how ridiculous that would be. Of course, it would never be. Now, the Catholic Church came up with a legal fiction to help out with this problem with the mega-diocese. It is the legal fiction of auxiliary bishops. Now, an auxiliary bishop is one who's appointed as an assistant bishop to the primary bishop ordinary of the diocese. Now, according to apostolic example, the church fathers, ancient church councils, a bishop must be a bishop of a geographic area. So you cannot have 3 bishops as the bishops of the same place. For someone like St. Ignatius of Antioch or Polycarp, this would be schismatic and it would be heretical. One bishop for one place. So the popes, beginning in the 1500s, established this new concept of, it wasn't new, it's been happening before, but it was always declared as an abuse by previous popes. But in the 1500s, Pope Leo X, who was the pope who was opposed by Martin Luther in 1517, he regularized and allowed for there to be auxiliary bishops. And what they did is, this is why I call it legal fiction, they would take a bishop, make him a bishop, they would appoint him over a diocese that no longer exists. Remember, every bishop has to have his own geographic diocese. So they would go somewhere in the Middle East or somewhere in North Africa, and they would say, you're the bishop of XYZ African town. And now I'm appointing you to be the assistant of, and appoint him as a bishop in another diocese. You see, because there's an understanding in Catholic theology that a bishop has to be a bishop of his own diocese. And so they create the legal fiction in the 1500s of appointing a bishop to a town and then placing him somewhere else. Now, I'm going to use the most famous auxiliary bishop of our time, and that is Bishop Barron, who's on YouTube, very well known. And I'm not knocking Barron in this video, I'm just using him as an example. He is an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. But when the Pope appointed him a bishop, he made him the bishop of Macriana in Mauritania. This is an ancient Berber town in Algeria. Bishop Barron, as far as I know, hasn't been there. He's not a shepherd to those people. He's not a pastor. He has nothing to do with that area on earth other than being appointed the titular bishop. Meanwhile, He's officially a geographic bishop of a diocese, titular, but he's serving in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Now, ideally, if we were going to do this the way the church fathers did it, or even in the early medieval era, well, all the way up into the late medieval era, we would have Bishop Barron to be the bishop of his pastoral region, which happens to be Santa Barbara. So we would break up the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, which is so huge, and I think there's 5 auxiliary bishops helping the Archbishop of LA. All those would be broken up into regions, and so Barron would just be the Bishop of Santa Barbara. And he would be proximate, near, and close to those people, and it wouldn't be this giant ecclesial machine, a mega-diocese of LA. And what we see in these mega-dioceses, for example, LA, Chicago, New York, Boston, we see low vocation numbers, low numbers of seminarians when you compare it to the population that they have. We also see more sexual scandal and abuse payouts, settlements. Why? It's easier to hide in these mega-diocese frameworks. Think about it. It's hard to police. Let's say you have a city of only 10 police and you're supposed to catch all the crime. You're not going to do that. Multiply the police to 100, to 1,000, to 10,000, the crime rate goes down. Same thing in the vineyard of our Lord. We need shepherds watching the sheep. If wolves are coming in, and by wolves I mean demonic influences, right? Satanic influences, roaring, seeking someone to devour, to destroy, we need more shepherds at the borders. Sometimes the flock is infiltrated by false shepherds. Again, we need more shepherds. The only way we can have this proximate, close inspection of the sheep and of the shepherds is to have more chief shepherds, and that is bishops, which means smaller dioceses, not a mega-diocese. So how big should these dioceses be? Well, the principle of subsidiarity is the Catholic principle that matters ought to be handled by the smallest and most proximate competent authority. So you can't have a cardinal archbishop living 90 miles away overseeing 4 million people. That is contrary to the Catholic principle of subsidiarity. We're really talking about pastoral subsidiarity here. Well, let's look at medieval Paris. The Archbishop of medieval Paris oversaw 150 to 250,000 people in Paris in the medieval era. That's a big diocese for the medieval era. And I really think that in our own time, we don't need any diocese bigger than that, 150, 200,000. Personally, I think the diocesan side should be about 100,000 souls. That way you have a bishop with about 100 priests, and about 100 parishes could easily cover 100,000 people. Pastorally, the bishop would be known by the people. He would know the people. He'd be closer to priests. There'd be more vocations. There'd be more thriving. Now, I get it. If the bishop is corrupt, if the priests are corrupt, if there's bad doctrine, it's not going to work. So this is just a structural, canonical thing that goes back to the early church. It's not going to fix everything, and I want to stress that. I'm just saying that this is a piece of the puzzle for us to move forward and end scandal and end sexual pederasty in our church. Let's take a look at Exodus 18. Here we have Moses. He is ruling the people. He's acting like a bishop, an overseer. The Greek word for bishop is episkopos, which means epi, over, skopos, scope, to see, overseer. So Moses is acting as an episkopos, overseer of the people. There's about 400,000 Israelites. So this is a big number of people, smaller than a lot of archdioceses in our time, but a lot of people. And Moses' father-in-law, his name is Jethro, comes to Moses and he says, "What are you doing?" Here's the actual quote from Exodus 18. When his father-in-law Jethro saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone as judge while all the people stand around you morning until evening?" And Moses says, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me," so on and so forth. So Jethro says, what you are doing is not good. And he says, what you should do is appoint trustworthy men and appoint them over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them serve as judges, but when they have difficult cases, bring it to you. So that's Exodus 18, and we can see here that Jethro is promoting subsidiarity. He's telling Moses, hey, break this down. It's not right for you to have a mega-diocese with the people of Israel. It needs to be broken up into smaller chunks. And notice Jethro doesn't say, men over 10,000, over 100,000, over 1 million. he has the smaller chunks, over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Jethro saying, Moses, let's practice the Catholic principle of subsidiarity. Finally, one last thing that the Mega-Diocese has led to is the bishop or the archbishop as CEO, as bureaucrat. This is a problem. I hear priests all over the country complain that they don't have a pastoral relationship with their bishop. Now, the bishop is meant to be the father of fathers. We lay people, who is our spiritual father? It's our pastor. He is our shepherd. He guides us in doctrine. He provides food and nourishment for us in the sacraments. But who is the pastor? Who is the shepherd of the priest? He's not the priest of himself, the pastor of himself. That's ridiculous. The father of the priest is the bishop. The bishop should have a paternal relationship with his sons in the priesthood. And when we have a mega-diocese where you have one archbishop and 1,000 priests or more, like you do in LA, you cannot foster the filial devotion, the filial friendship between the bishop and the priest. So we need to return to the idea that the bishop is the father of the fathers. You know, it used to be in the early church, we now call all priests father, but in the early church, the term father, even the term papa, was reserved, this is pre-Nicene, was reserved to bishops. The bishops were seen as almost like angelic fathers to the people and also to the priesthood and to the deacons as well. So we need to turn away from the mega-diocese. We need subsidiarity. We need smaller dioceses. We need more bishops. Again, this isn't going to fix all problems. We also need a revolution, a return to Catholic orthodoxy, traditional Thomism, traditional moral theology, reverent liturgy. I could go on and on. If you watch my videos, I talk about all these things. It's time that we wake up and we as lay people say, we don't want a mega-diocese. We don't want to be part of a classroom that has one teacher to 5,000 students. That's not fair to the teacher. It's not fair to the students. And to be honest, placing these bishops over these enormous dioceses, the mega-diocese, with all of these priests and all of these people, it's not fair to the bishop. It's not fair to the priest. It's not fair for the laity. It's a broken system. You could take the best high school teacher in the world and put him in a class with 12, 15 students, and those students would excel. They would do great. You could take that same best teacher, best high school teacher in the whole world, and put him in a class of 60 students. He's not going to perform well. Those students aren't going to perform well. So let's create a fertile vineyard, a fertile field, where the laborers can go into the field and reap the fruits of the Lord. What we need are smaller dioceses that can be pastorally managed by holy, great bishops and his assistants, the priests and the deacons. Hey, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button in the bottom right corner. Also follow me on Twitter, Taylor R. Marshall, and you can follow me on Facebook at Dr. Taylor Marshall. God bless. Pray for me. I'll pray for you.